Somewhere beneath the sands of present-day Pakistan and northwest India lies a city that, more than 4,000 years ago, already had private bathrooms, perfectly aligned streets, and an underground sewage system more advanced than many cities built 3,000 years after it. But there is a layer to this story that almost no channel shows. While Egypt was raising pharaohs and Mesopotamia was carving kings into stone, this civilization seems to have deliberately hidden any face of power. No giant statue, no spectacular royal tomb, no inscription of personal glory. And the most unsettling part is that this civilization's writing, carved into thousands of stone seals, still resists every attempt at decipherment to this day. Nowhere on the planet has anyone managed, until this very moment, to hear this people's exact voice. Throughout this video, you will come to understand why this civilization may have been brought down not by war, not by invasion, but by something it itself had mastered with an almost impossible perfection for its time: water. And by the end, we will reveal why this story, more than 4,000 years old, may be quietly repeating itself before our eyes in this very century, in rivers, in harvests, and in cities that once again seem indestructible. Before we continue, I need to be honest with you. This is a small, humble channel, and we rely heavily on your kindness to keep producing videos like this one, always built on serious research and verified sources. If you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write a comment sharing what surprised you most in this story, and share this video with someone who loves ancient history. You help this project keep existing. We are deeply grateful that you are here watching this far. Now, let's go back to the Indus Valley. To understand the Indus Valley, we need to go back long before the great brick cities. We need to go back to a place called Mehrgarh, located at the foot of the Bolan Pass, in the region of present-day Balochistan, Pakistan. There, around the year 7000 before Christ, small groups of farmers were already cultivating wheat and barley, domesticating goats and sheep, and building rectangular mud brick houses. Mehrgarh had no planned streets, no drainage systems. It was simply the beginning, but it is precisely this beginning that makes the story even more fascinating. Archaeologists who excavated the site found evidence of an almost unbelievable practice for such an ancient people: dental drilling performed with stone tools, a primitive form of dentistry dated to more than 7,000 years ago. Over thousands of years, this small community kept transforming. Pottery arrived, trade in shells and semi-precious stones expanded, and slowly this people began moving toward the plains of the Indus River. There is an important academic debate here, and it is only fair to present both sides. Some researchers argue that agriculture reached Mehrgarh through direct influence from the Near East, coming from the region of present-day Iran. Others, like the French archaeologist Jean-François Jarige, who led the original excavations, argue that Mehrgarh had its own local agricultural development, with independent domestication of barley and zebu cattle. The truth, as in many cases in archaeology, probably lies somewhere between these two possibilities. There was external influence, yes, but there was also local invention. What matters for our story is this: when the Indus Valley Civilization finally flourished, it did not appear out of nowhere. It grew out of more than 4,000 years of quiet experimentation, of generations of farmers who learned to tame the soil long before they learned to tame water. And it was exactly this accumulated knowledge that, centuries later, allowed for the construction of something that still leaves archaeologists without a complete answer today: cities planned with a precision that, at first glance, seems out of place for their time. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called the Harappan Civilization, flourished between roughly the year 3300 and the year 1300 before Christ, with its urban peak concentrated between the years 2600 and 1900 before Christ. It spread across an impressive area, covering regions of present-day Pakistan, northwest India, and nearby territories. In territorial extent, it was one of the largest urban civilizations of the ancient world, comparable to, and in some respects larger than, the combined area occupied by Egypt and Mesopotamia. Its best-known cities include Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dholavira, Ganeriwala, Lothal, and Rakhigarhi, each revealing a different piece of the same puzzle. But the most intriguing thing about this civilization is not its size, it is its difference. In Egypt, we see pyramids and pharaohs depicted in colossal statues. In Mesopotamia, we see ziggurats, kings and wars carefully recorded on clay tablets. In the Indus Valley, we see something completely different: standardization, drainage, weights, seals, bricks, and streets. It is as if power in this civilization were less interested in showing itself off and more interested in organizing, and this simple difference raises a question that will follow us until the end of this video. What does it mean to govern a civilization without needing to show its face? To grasp the real scale of this story, it is worth placing it alongside the two other great civilizations born at almost the same time. In the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt organized its society around a pharaoh considered divine, with monumental pyramids raised as gateways to eternity. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, city-states like Ur and Uruk, and later the Akkadian Empire, fought for power through warrior kings, temples dedicated to specific gods, and the first written law codes in human history. And, hundreds of kilometers away, in the Indus River Valley, a third civilization was growing, contemporary with the other two, but following a completely different logic. While Egyptians and Mesopotamians left mountains of inscriptions recounting their own glories, military victories, and royal lineages, the Harappans seemed more interested in something else, standardizing, organizing, and building collective urban infrastructure. This difference is not a small detail. It suggests that, more than 4,000 years ago, there already existed at least two completely distinct models for organizing a complex civilization, one based on the personal display of power and another based on impersonal systems of collective organization. And here is a question worth holding on to for the rest of this video. Which of these two models would, in the end, prove more resistant to time? It is worth remembering that, in the same period, further east along the Yellow River in China, a fourth ancient civilization was also beginning to organize itself around increasingly complex villages, even though its full urban development came a little later. This means that within a span of a few centuries, at least four great cradles of civilization emerged almost independently in different parts of the ancient world, each developing its own solutions to the same fundamental challenges: water, food, social organization, and, eventually, writing. And centuries later, on the American continent, civilizations such as the Olmecs in present-day Mexico would also develop their own urban solutions in complete independence, showing that complex urbanization was not an isolated accident, but a recurring human response to the same fundamental challenges, repeated across different continents in different centuries, with no contact between these societies. Mohenjo-daro is one of the most powerful images of this civilization. Streets perfectly aligned in a grid pattern, crossing at nearly right angles, neighborhoods planned in advance, before they were even built. Houses with direct access to water through wells distributed strategically across the city. Covered sewage systems connecting private bathrooms to underground drainage channels that ran beneath the streets themselves. The famous Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro may have been used for rituals, religious ceremonies, or communal purification practices. We do not know with absolute certainty its exact function, but its engineering reveals a rare concern for its time with water, hygiene, and collective organization. There is another detail few documentaries mention: Harappan bricks. Across virtually the entire civilization, from Mohenjo-daro to Harappa, from Lothal to Dholavira, fired clay bricks followed, almost obsessively, the same mathematical ratio: 4 units of length to 2 units of width to 1 unit of height. Think about what that means. For that exact ratio to repeat itself in cities separated by hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers, there must have been some kind of shared standard, passed down from generation to generation, from potter to potter, over centuries. The same holds for the Harappan weight system. Small stone blocks cut with extreme precision, following a binary scale based on a unit of roughly 13.7 grams. The same weight standard appears in completely different cities, suggesting a shared system of commercial trust that crossed urban borders without any visible army to enforce these rules. In some cities, archaeologists identified large rectangular structures, built on raised platforms, with thick walls and good ventilation, interpreted by many researchers as possible granaries, meant to store grain surpluses for the whole community. But even this interpretation is debated. Other archaeologists argue these structures could have had administrative, religious, or even residential functions for local authorities, since no significant amount of charred grain has been found inside them, leaving the hypothesis still open. The central question in any case remains the same: who coordinated all of this? Because building cities like these requires rigid standards, it requires long-term planning, it requires advanced technical knowledge, it requires an organized workforce, and it requires constant maintenance. But where are the kings? Where are the palaces? Where are the royal tombs? This is one of the great Harappan mysteries, and it is only going to get stranger from here. This weight system followed an elegant mathematical logic. The smallest units doubled in value in sequence 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and 64, before switching to a scale based on multiples of 10 for the larger weights, meant for trading large volumes. This kind of mixed numerical system combining binary doubling with decimal multiples is considered by many historians of mathematics to be evidence of advanced abstract thinking, applied practically to everyday trade. Perhaps the most incredible part of this story is not even about the Harappans themselves. It is about how, for thousands of years, the modern world simply did not know this civilization had ever existed. The first signs appeared almost by accident. In 1856, British engineers building a railway line between the cities of Lahore and Multan in present-day Pakistan needed bricks for the railbed, and they found in abundance perfectly cut ancient bricks scattered across a mound of earth known locally as Harappa. No one imagined at that moment that those bricks belonged to a city more than 4,000 years old. Thousands of them were removed and literally used to support the railway tracks, unknowingly destroying irreplaceable parts of one of the greatest archaeological sites in human history. The British archaeologist Alexander Cunningham visited the site in 1872 and even published a drawing of a seal found there with completely unknown symbols. But without enough context, he had no idea what stood before his eyes. Only in 1924 did the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, John Marshall, announce to the world through the British magazine Illustrated London News the discovery of a completely unknown urban civilization, dated thousands of years earlier than any historian expected to find on the Indian subcontinent. The announcement shocked the academic world in a way comparable in scale to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, which had happened only 2 years earlier. Suddenly, the history of human civilization needed to be rewritten, including, alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia, a third urban civilization equally ancient, equally sophisticated, and completely forgotten by humanity's collective memory. Today, more than a century after that discovery, parts of Harappa still bear the marks of that accidental destruction. And this reminds us of something important. What we know about this civilization is only a fraction of what originally existed. Very likely, more secrets remain buried beneath ground that has never been excavated. But who exactly were the people who lived inside these perfectly planned cities? Archaeological findings paint a surprisingly vivid picture of daily Harappan life. Cotton, for example, appears to have been domesticated and cultivated in the Indus Valley before almost anywhere else in the ancient world. Cotton fabric fragments have been found at Mohenjo-daro, and the very term used in Akkadian texts to refer to this material, karpasum, bears an intriguing resemblance to words still used on the Indian subcontinent today for the same plant. Harappan children played with small terracotta carts fitted with working wheels, miniature oxen, and even bird-shaped whistles. Game dice were also found, carved from terracotta cubes with dots marked on each face, practically identical in concept to the dice we use today. Adults, for their part, seem to place enormous importance on personal appearance. Ivory combs, polished bronze mirrors, elaborate necklaces of carved carnelian beads, and bracelets made from seashells were found in impressive quantities at different sites. And there is one particularly moving detail. At Mohenjo-daro, archaeologists found a small bronze statuette, popularly known as the Dancing Girl, depicting a young woman in a relaxed pose, one bangle-covered arm resting on her hip. It is one of the earliest known representations of the human body in natural movement, and it still, more than 4,000 years later, conveys a feeling almost impossible to put into words, the feeling of standing before a real person. The Harappan diet included wheat, barley, rice in some regions, legumes, milk and dairy from zebu cattle, fish caught in rivers and coastal areas, and fruits such as dates and grapes. And, perhaps most surprising of all, practically every house, even the simplest ones, had some kind of access to a bathroom connected to the city's drainage network. This level of basic sanitation, distributed relatively equally across different neighborhoods, would not be matched in much of the world, including Europe, for more than 3,000 years. It is these small details, the game die, the ivory comb, the wheeled toy, the bathroom connected to the sewer, that turned this civilization from a set of silent ruins into something much closer to us than we imagine. At Mohenjo-daro, another important Harappan site in present-day Pakistan, archaeologists found evidence of entire workshops dedicated to producing carnelian beads, using a drilling technique so precise that modern researchers, attempting to reproduce it with traditional tools, took days to drill a single bead, the same amount of time that Harappan artisans apparently managed to beat using tools made from an extremely hard stone similar to quartz. This craft specialization, replicated in similar form across different cities, suggests a Harappan economy far more sophisticated than is usually imagined, with entire cities specialized in specific products, distributed afterward across the civilization's entire trade network, and exported, as we will see further on, all the way to distant Mesopotamia. One of the most fascinating features of the Indus Valley is the absence of clear evidence of a monumental ruling elite. This does not mean society was completely egalitarian. No complex urban civilization is that simple. But, to this day, archaeologists have found no grand palaces, no spectacular royal tombs, no colossal temples comparable to those of Egypt and Mesopotamia. This completely changes how we should think about this civilization. Perhaps Harappan power was decentralized. Perhaps it was controlled by local councils, by influential merchant families, by religious authorities, or by interconnected urban networks functioning almost like a confederation of city-states, rather than a single centralized empire. Some contemporary archaeologists, studying the concept of heterarchy, argue that complex societies do not necessarily need a single centralized hierarchy to function. Instead of vertical power, with a king at the top, there could have been horizontal power, distributed among different specialized groups such as merchants, priests, artisans, and local administrators, each controlling a specific part of urban life, with none of them fully dominating the others. This hypothesis, though still debated, helps explain why we find so much technical standardization but so little evidence of personal propaganda of power. Perhaps authority was not embodied in a single face but built into the system itself, into weights, measures, bricks, seals, and the commercial norms everyone followed. The Indus Valley may have been a civilization where power did not shout through monumental stone. It whispered through silent patterns repeated from city to city, from generation to generation. And if you think this is merely an archaeological curiosity, wait until we reach the end of this video, because this absence of a visible center of power may have been, at the same time, this civilization's greatest strength and its greatest fragility. If Mohenjo-daro represents Harappan urban engineering in its best-known form, Dholavira represents something even more astonishing, the engineering of survival in the middle of a desert. Located on Kajir Island, in the Rann of Kutch region, in the present-day Indian state of Gujarat, Dholavira was built in one of the harshest environments of the entire Harappan civilization. There was no perennial river nearby, only two seasonal streams called Mansar and Manhar, which carried water only during the monsoon season, and it was exactly this scarcity that forced the inhabitants of Dholavira to develop one of the most sophisticated water management systems in the entire ancient world. Archaeologists identified 16 large water reservoirs, interconnected by stone-carved channels capable of capturing every drop of rain and every trickle of runoff from the buildings themselves. One of these reservoirs has stairways carved into three corners, descending 30 steps down to the water level, in a structure that can be considered one of the earliest known forms of what would later become famous in India as the step well. In 2021, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization recognized Dholavira as a World Heritage Site, highlighting precisely its urban planning and its advanced water engineering as unique examples of Harappan civilization. But perhaps Dholavira's most intriguing discovery is another one. At one of the city's entrances, archaeologists found a wooden signboard with 10 symbols of the Indus script, each sign measuring roughly 37 centimeters in height. It is the largest inscription ever found in the entire Harappan civilization, and, even so, it remains impossible to read. Dholavira shows us something essential about this civilization. It did not merely coexist with water, it calculated, stored, and rationed every drop, almost as if it somehow knew that one day the water might simply stop coming. Among the most intriguing artifacts left behind by the Harappan civilization are its steatite stone seals, small square or rectangular objects carved with extreme care and presumably used to authenticate goods, identify merchants, or mark ownership. The vast majority of these seals depict a specific animal, a bull-like creature with a single central horn, popularly known as the Harappan unicorn. No one knows for certain whether this animal represented a mythological creature, a real animal viewed in a stylized profile, or a status symbol tied to a particular group, clan, or profession. Other seals depict zebu bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, and water buffalo, almost always positioned in front of a small object researchers call a cult object, whose function also remains a mystery. But there is one seal found at Mohenjo-daro that became particularly famous and particularly debated. It depicts a human figure seated in a position notably resembling a meditative posture, surrounded by animals such as a tiger, an elephant, a rhinoceros, and a buffalo, with what appear to be two antelopes beneath the seat. Some researchers, including the British archaeologist John Marshall, who led the first excavations in the 1920s, suggested that this figure might represent a deity associated with animals, and went so far as to compare this image to much later representations of Hindu deities associated with animals and meditation. It is important to stress, with full academic honesty, that this interpretation is highly speculative, and much of the current scientific community treats this connection with caution, since it was proposed decades before any solid understanding of Harappan religion existed, and it rests largely on superficial visual similarities with no text confirming the image's religious meaning. What we can say with confidence is that this seal reveals a complex symbolic relationship between humans and wild animals, organized around a central figure and repeated, with small variations, in other Harappan artifacts. These seals circulated throughout the civilization from city to city, and some, as we will see next, crossed the Persian Gulf and reached as far as Mesopotamia, carrying with them perhaps more than just goods, carrying with them fragments of a belief system that to this day remains sealed by the very writing we still cannot read. If Harappan politics remains a mystery, its religion is perhaps even harder to reconstruct. No clearly identifiable monumental temples have been found in the sense we know from Egypt or Mesopotamia, but some clues suggest organized ritual practices. At the site of Kalibangan in the present-day Indian state of Rajasthan, archaeologists discovered a series of structures believed to be fire altars, small rectangular pits containing ash and animal bones, possibly used in ceremonies related to sacrifice or purification. Small terracotta female figurines with elaborate headdresses were found in significant numbers at various Harappan sites, leading some researchers to suggest the existence of some kind of cult related to fertility or the female figure, although this interpretation once again remains speculative and unconfirmed by any text. Cylindrical stone objects, interpreted by some as representations linked to fertility cults and by others simply as tools or practical weights, have also been found at different sites, sparking debate over their true purpose. What is clear amid so much uncertainty is that Harappan civilization did not build its spiritual identity around visible centralized temples the way its Egyptian and Mesopotamian contemporaries did. Whether because that identity was spread across small domestic rituals or simply because we have not yet found the civilization's central religious structures, the result is the same. Another chapter of this story remains for now silent. The Harappans left behind thousands of signs carved into seals, pottery, tablets, and small objects, but the Indus script remains to this very day completely undeciphered, and this is one of the greatest mysteries in world archaeology. The problem begins with the very nature of the inscriptions. They are extremely short. Most known texts have, on average, only 5 signs. The longest inscription ever found has just over 20 signs, a tiny number compared to the long inscriptions of Egypt or Mesopotamia. There is still no bilingual inscription equivalent to the Rosetta Stone capable of serving as a bridge between the Indus script and any known language. And there is still a genuine academic debate over whether this system represents in fact a complete language with grammar and syntax, or whether it might be closer to administrative symbols, identity marks, trade codes, or some combination of different functions. Even the exact number of signs is a matter of disagreement among specialists. The Indian researcher Iravatam Mahadevan catalogued roughly 417 independent signs. The Finnish linguist Asko Parpola arrived at a similar number, close to 386 signs. The researcher Brian Wells, meanwhile, proposed a much broader count of nearly 700 signs. By treating variations and ligatures as distinct signs, this difference is not merely a technical curiosity. It reveals just how fragmented our understanding of this writing system is. We are essentially trying to assemble a puzzle without knowing how many pieces it actually has. Each seal feels like a closed window, We see Harappan unicorns, bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, water buffalo, mysterious figures, and signs that repeat in patterns suggesting organization, yet hiding their meaning with an almost deliberate perfection. There is even a minority position, though seriously debated within the academic community, put forward in 2004 by researchers Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel, who argued that the Indus script might not represent a complete language at all, but rather a system of non-linguistic symbols similar to heraldic emblems, religious marks, or clan identifiers, comparable to systems used in other ancient cultures that never developed a full phonetic writing system. This hypothesis sparked a strong reaction in the scientific community. In 2009, the Indian researcher Rajesh Rao and his team published in the journal Science a statistical analysis of the structure of Harappan signs, comparing patterns of repetition and variation against different types of natural languages and known non-linguistic systems. The results suggested that the internal structure of the Indus script behaves more like a real language than a purely symbolic system, reopening the possibility that, yes, a complete language might be hidden within it. The debate to this day has not been settled, and interest in solving this mystery is not purely academic. In 2024, the government of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu announced a $1 million prize for any researcher who could decipher the Indus script in a way proven and accepted by the scientific community. As of this video release, the prize remains unclaimed. We know how they built their cities, we know how they drained water, we know they traded across long distances, we know they standardized their weights with remarkable precision. But we still do not know with absolute certainty what they wrote, nor what language they thought in. Some researchers favor a Dravidian origin for this lost language. Others point to a possible connection with older language families now extinct. None of these hypotheses at this point has been definitively proven, and it is important to present this uncertainty honestly, rather than pretending to a certainty that science does not yet have. In recent years, researchers have also begun using artificial intelligence and machine learning in an attempt to identify hidden patterns in the Indus script. So far, however, results remain limited because these systems generally need large amounts of data to work well, and the total known corpus of Harappan inscriptions, fewer than 5,000 objects, is considered far too small for today's artificial intelligence to break this ancient silence on its own. In the texts of Mesopotamia, written in Cuneo for more than 4,000 years ago, a mysterious name appears, Meluha. Most researchers associate Meluha with the world of the Indus Valley, and the evidence for this association is, to say the least, impressive. Sargon of Akkad, the founder of history's first great empire, ruled between the years 2334 and 2279 before Christ. In one of his inscriptions, he boasts that ships from Meluha, Magan, and Dilmun docked directly at the ports of his capital Akkad. Decades later, his grandson Naram Sin recorded in his own inscriptions the presence of merchants from Meluha bringing exotic goods as tribute. And in a still later generation, the ruler Gudea of Lagash described in detail the importing of blocks of lapis lazuli and bright carnelian directly from Meluha for the construction of his temples. The Mesopotamians repeatedly mentioned goods coming from this distant land: fine wood, ivory, carnelian, exotic shells, precious metals, and rare semi-precious stones. And here is one of the most fascinating details of this entire trade story: the existence of professional interpreters. One Akkadian cylinder seal bears the inscription, Shui Lishu, interpreter of the Meluhan language. This means that communication between Harappans and Mesopotamians was frequent enough and economically important enough to require specialized professionals just to translate business negotiations. There is also a little-known but fascinating detail. Tablets from the period of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, written under the reign of King Shulgi, mention the existence of a village called Meluha, located within Sumerian territory itself, near the city of Girsu. Researchers believe this settlement functioned as a permanent trading colony, where Harappan merchants lived, worked, and maintained direct contact with the Mesopotamian administration, even receiving grain rations recorded in administrative tablets. Imagine that, an entire Harappan community living at the heart of Mesopotamia, with its own identity preserved in official Sumerian records, more than 4,000 years ago. Harappan objects have been found in several Mesopotamian cities, including Ur, Babylon, and Kish. Carnelian beads engraved with the technique characteristic of the Indus Valley appeared in royal tombs at Ur, dated to roughly 2600 before Christ. Seals bearing the undeciphered Indus script have been found hundreds of kilometers from any known Harappan city. This means one thing very clearly: the Indus Valley was not isolated. It was part of a connected trade network linking the Indian subcontinent to the Persian Gulf, to Mesopotamia, and through it, indirectly to Egypt itself. Ships, caravans, ports, merchants, interpreters, and administrative seals formed a web of international trade that in many ways anticipates the globalized world we know today, even on a completely different scale. Akkadian documents even mention exotic animals sent as gifts from Meluha, including specific breeds of dogs and possibly ornamental birds intended for Mesopotamian courts as symbols of prestige. Akkadian seals from the time of ruler Naram Sin depict long-horned water buffalo, an animal that did not exist naturally in Mesopotamia, and which researchers believe was imported, alive, directly from the Indus Valley, as an exotic curiosity meant to impress the royal court. Lothal is one of the most important sites for understanding the maritime dimension of Harappan civilization. For decades, there was a genuine academic debate over the function of a large rectangular basin found at the site, roughly 218 meters long and 37 meters wide. Was it a water reservoir for irrigation, or was it in fact a dock for ships? The archaeologist who excavated the site in 1955, S.R. Rao, championed the dock hypothesis from the start. But other researchers, including the respected archaeologist Gregory Possel, questioned this interpretation, arguing that the lack of substantial shipbuilding remains suggested, instead a greater reliance on overland trade. This debate was only partially resolved recently. In 2024, researchers from the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, published a study using satellite imagery, historical maps, and digital elevation models to reconstruct the region's ancient landscape. The result was striking. The research identified an ancient channel of the Sabarmati River, now diverted, that connected Lothal directly to the Gulf of Kambat and to other important Harappan sites, including Dholavira. These discoveries significantly strengthened the hypothesis that the structure was, in fact, a tidal dock, used to receive ships that took advantage of the natural flow of coastal waters. Even with this new evidence, it is important to be honest. The academic debate is not 100% settled, and dissenting voices still exist within the scientific community. But the weight of evidence today leans strongly toward the existence of a functioning port. Lothal also reveals a city tied to intense craft production, with carnelian bead industries, ivory workshops, shell processing, and a large brick warehouse positioned strategically beside the basin, suggesting an organized logistical system for loading and unloading goods. Circular seals in the Persian style, of the type associated with Dilmun, have been found both at Lothal and at Failaka, as well as at various Mesopotamian sites, functioning almost like a shared visual signature among merchants from different civilizations along the entire Persian Gulf trade route. If Lothal was, in fact, a maritime trading center, then the Indus Valley Civilization was not merely a civilization of rivers. It was also, perhaps surprisingly, a civilization of sea routes connected to the Persian Gulf through intermediary ports such as those of Dilmun in present-day Bahrain and Falaka in present-day Kuwait. Rakhigarhi, in the present-day Indian state of Haryana, is the largest site ever identified from the entire Harappan civilization, and, in 2019, this site entered the history of science in a completely unexpected way. An international team, led by archaeologist Vasant Shinde of Deccan College, in partnership with geneticist David Reich of Harvard University and researcher Niraj Rai of the Birbalsani Institute of Paleosciences, managed to extract and sequence for the first time in history the complete genome of an individual from the Indus Valley Civilization. The task was not easy. Researchers analyzed samples from 61 different skeletons found in the Rakhigarhi cemetery, only one of them belonging to a woman buried between the years 2800 and 2300 before Christ, preserved enough genetic material for full analysis. The hot, humid climate of the Indian subcontinent normally destroys ancient DNA, which makes this discovery all the more rare and valuable, and what this genome revealed was, to say the least, revolutionary. The Rakhigarhi woman's ancestry combined heritage related to ancient farmers from the Iranian plateau with a deeply local ancestry, which scientists call ancient ancestral South Asian ancestry, present in the region for more than 50,000 years. And here is the most important and most debated point of the entire discovery. This woman's genome showed no trace of ancestry from the steppes of Central Asia, the same ancestry linked in later genetic studies to peoples who entered the Indian subcontinent in more recent periods. This sparked an intense debate, and it is important to present it honestly without taking sides. Some researchers, including Shinde himself, publicly suggested that this absence of steppe ancestry might indicate that the Harappans already spoke some form of ancient Sanskrit. But this interpretation was quickly challenged by other authors of the same study, including Niraj Rai and geneticist Vagish Narasimhan, who rightly pointed out that no DNA can reveal what language a person spoke. Genetics and language are completely different kinds of information, and mixing them up is a basic scientific error. What we can state with confidence is the following: the population that built the great Harappan cities had deeply local roots formed over thousands of years on the Indian subcontinent itself, with genetic contributions from the Iranian plateau in a more distant past. The arrival of other ancestries on the subcontinent, including those associated with the steppes of Central Asia, appears to have occurred after the Harappan urban collapse, according to most genetic studies published to date. And perhaps the most beautiful conclusion of this research is this: the Harappan genetic profile did not disappear, it became part of the genetic foundation of the modern Indian population. In other words, perhaps the Indus Valley did not simply vanish, perhaps it dissolved into India's own continuous history, surviving to this day in the blood of millions of people who have never even heard of Mohenjo-daro. Today, Harappan sites are divided between two countries, Pakistan and India, a border that did not even exist when these cities were built. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa lie within Pakistani territory, while Dholavira, Lothal, and Rakhigarhi lie within Indian territory. This modern geographic division, created only in 1947, naturally complicates archaeological research, since direct scientific cooperation between the two countries over a heritage that belongs equally to both is not always simple to arrange. Even so, excavation work continues slowly on both sides of the border. It is estimated that less than half of all known Harappan sites have been systematically excavated to date, and new smaller sites continue to be identified through satellite imagery and archaeological surface surveys. This means something exciting for anyone interested in ancient history. This story is still being written. It is not a closed chapter of an old book. It is an ongoing investigation, with new discoveries emerging every few years, capable of rewriting, once again, everything we thought we knew about this silent civilization. For a long time, some theories tried to explain the end of Harappan civilization through invasions, wars, or sudden catastrophes. Today, the view accepted by most of the scientific community is more complex and also more interesting. The great cities were not simply destroyed in a single event. They lost their function gradually over centuries. Climate change, the reduction of monsoon rains, instability in river courses, growing pressure on agriculture, and the reorganization of trade routes seem to have combined to create a slow, painful process of deurbanization. The population did not disappear, it dispersed. The great metropolises gave way to smaller, more scattered communities. Large-scale agriculture gave way to local farming strategies better adapted to an increasingly dry climate. The urban world, once centered around planned cities, fragmented into rural landscapes. This was not a fall in the traditional sense of the word, it was a metamorphosis, slow and almost invisible while it was happening, but devastating when viewed from a distance of 4,000 years. Modern climate theory, supported by decades of geological research, points directly to prolonged droughts as the main driver of this slow collapse. We are not talking about a single bad year. We are not talking about a one-decade crisis. We are talking about periods of water stress capable of spanning entire generations. Imagine being born during a drought, living your whole life inside it, and dying before it even ended. Now imagine that affecting at the same time rivers, harvests, trade, food reserves, migration routes, and the social trust that keeps a civilization functioning. Geologist Liviu Giosun of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution led one of the most influential studies on this topic in 2012, published in the journal Climate of the Past. The research analyzed sediment cores taken from the Indus River shelf, containing ancient DNA preserved in extremely low oxygen environments. The conclusion was direct. Starting around the year 2500 before Christ, a shift in climate patterns caused summer monsoon rains to gradually dry up, making agriculture increasingly difficult and in some cases impossible near the great Harappan cities. Giosun himself summed up this window of climatic opportunity with an interesting idea, describing the Harappans as a civilization that took advantage of a rare balance between floods that were too intense and droughts that were too severe, a period when conditions were nearly perfect for river-based agriculture. The river system known as the Gagar Hakra, today almost entirely dry along its former course, depended entirely on monsoon rains with no steady glacial feed. Some researchers associate this ancient course with the Sarasvati River mentioned in later religious texts, although this identification is still debated among archaeologists and geologists, with no definitive consensus on the matter. As the monsoons retreated southward and eastward, the Gagar-Hakra progressively shrank back toward the foothills of the Himalayas, producing increasingly irregular and less extensive floods, making flood-based agriculture less and less sustainable. It is worth noting that, although the climate theory is the most widely accepted today, it is not the only explanation science has proposed. Some geologists suggest that tectonic shifts in the region, including small movements along fault lines near the Himalayas, may also have contributed to altering the course of rivers like the Gagar-Hakra, either independently of or together with climate change. It is important to present this possibility honestly because science rarely deals with single isolated causes. It is more likely that the Harappan urban collapse resulted from a combination of mutually reinforcing factors: climate, geology, agriculture, and social organization, all under pressure at the same time over the course of several generations. The population then began to move, not in a desperate flight but in a gradual migration toward the Ganges River basin, where summer rains remained more reliable, and winter rains brought by Mediterranean storms striking the Himalayas fed small streams more predictably. This is how the Indus Valley's once massive urban world gave way to smaller farming communities, spread across a much wider area and far more resilient to extreme climate variations. This historical moment, recorded in cave stalagmites in India, Oman, and other parts of the world, became known among scientists as the 4.2-kilo-year event, a period of severe, nearly global aridification that coincides strikingly with the almost simultaneous decline of three great ancient civilizations: the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, the Old Kingdom of Egypt, and the mature urban phase of Harappan civilization. This suggests that more than 4,000 years ago, a continental or perhaps even global climate shift may have placed pressure at the same time on practically every major center of civilization then existing on the planet, each reacting differently according to its own geography, its own agriculture, and its own capacity to adapt. This is perhaps the emotional heart of this entire story. The Harappans were, without exaggeration, masters of water. They built wells distributed with precision throughout their cities. They created canals, covered drainage systems, ceremonial baths, complex hydraulic structures, possible sea docks, and, in places like Dholavira, reservoirs capable of storing every drop of rain in the middle of a desert. But urban water is fundamentally different from climatic water. You can build the most advanced drainage system in the ancient world, but you cannot force the monsoon to return. You can dig deep wells and monumental reservoirs, but you cannot save an entire regional agriculture if rivers change course, if rainfall declines year after year, and if the whole landscape slowly becomes unpredictable. This irony makes the story of the Indus Valley deeply relevant today and deeply uncomfortable, because it shows us that even the most sophisticated engineering has limits in the face of climate. The Indus Valley Civilization is not just an ancient mystery, it is a mirror. It shows how highly organized societies, with technology advanced for their time, can be deeply vulnerable to slow changes, almost imperceptible from day to day. It does not take a meteor. It does not take a sudden invasion. It does not take a catastrophic explosion. Sometimes all it takes is a sequence of bad decades, one after another. Less rain, more heat, unstable rivers, agriculture under constant pressure, trade weakened by the loss of surpluses, cities that slowly become too expensive to sustain with the resources available. And then what once seemed eternal, solid, permanent, begins to come apart, not in a single night, but over generations. This pattern is not exclusive to the past. The Indus River basin itself today sustains one of the largest irrigation systems on the planet, responsible for feeding hundreds of millions of people across Pakistan and northwest India. And that modern system, just like the ancient one, depends on a climate balance that is not guaranteed forever. Scientists who study the region's climate warn that rising temperatures and the possible intensification of extreme events, from catastrophic floods to severe droughts, could threaten the water stability of an area that today supports a far larger population than the Harappan civilization ever sustained. History does not repeat itself identically, but sometimes it whispers warnings worth listening to. We still cannot read the Indus script. We still do not know exactly how its leaders were organized, if leaders even existed in the way we imagine. We still do not know with absolute certainty what language or languages this people spoke. We still do not know what they called themselves. We still do not know the meaning of many of their most repeated symbols. We still do not know all the details of their final transformation. But we know one thing with absolute certainty: they were not primitive. They were not peripheral. They were not a footnote between Egypt and Mesopotamia. They were one of the greatest urban experiments in human history, a civilization of bricks, water, trade, symbols, and silence. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not why they disappeared. Perhaps the real mystery is why it took us so long to realize that, in truth, they never disappeared completely. They simply changed shape. The Indus Valley Civilization left us cities with no visible kings, a writing system with no voice, an international trade network with no known empire, and hydraulic engineering with no monumental propaganda at all. It also left us a deeply uncomfortable question: what really keeps a civilization alive? If the answer were simply wealth, they would have survived. If it were simply advanced engineering, they would have survived. If it were simply international trade, they would have survived. If it were simply sophisticated urban organization, they would have survived. But civilizations depend on something far more fragile than that. They depend on water, on a stable climate, on fertile soil, on social trust, and, above all, on the capacity to adapt. And when these pillars begin to shift, even the most advanced cities of their time must choose between three paths: resist, migrate, or transform. In the Indus Valley, transformation won. And that is exactly why this story, more than 4,000 years removed from us, remains so powerful today. Because it does not speak only about the past, it speaks about us. Perhaps, in the end, the most honest lesson we can take from this story is humility. The humility of recognizing that a civilization can seem eternal, solid, indestructible, and still transform profoundly over just a few generations, and the humility of admitting that even with all the technology we have today, there are still questions about the human past that we simply cannot answer. Perhaps that is exactly why this civilization, so many millennia later, keeps calling us back. And if, after all of this, you are still wondering what really happened to the Harappans, perhaps that question, more than any definitive answer, is the true gift this civilization left us.